Howdy, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Data 101 CD CART User Forum. My name is Christy McKinley, and I serve as the National Conservation Desktop Team Lead for the NRCS National Headquarters. At today's forum, you will learn the best practices to edit land units, practices, and field inventories. We will highlight the land unit report tool and end the forum with updates on geospatial data layers, as well as new geospatial features coming soon. To capture your attendance, please fill out the Microsoft attendance form that's in the Q&A. We will have roughly about 10 minutes, maybe more, at the end of the forum to answer questions, so feel free to post questions in the chat as we're going through the forum. Next, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Chen, who's going to talk about the PLU and practice editor tools and capabilities in Conservation Desktop.
Hello there. Thank you, Christy. My name is Jennifer Chen, and I'm a Natural Resources Specialist with the Conservation Planning Technical Assistance Division, and I'm pleased to be with you all today. I'm going to talk through, as Christy mentioned, some of the tools available in both the planned land unit editor and practice editors. Additional information on these tools are contained within the Conservation Desktop lesson plans, which are available on the CD SharePoint site. We'll have a reference slide later on in this presentation that includes links to multiple references, including that SharePoint site link. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move to a recording of a video that I prepared to demonstrate this functionality to make sure to share all those good things with you. So stay tuned.
I have already opened a case file in a schedule, as you can see from the table of contents. And I've used the Find tool to zoom into my work area, which in this case is tract 1170. I'm going to go to the Create Edit PLUs function to add my land units to the case file and then to my schedule. Under Create Edit PLUs, you'll see the PLU Edit toolbar. There are a lot of tools available to use to manage land units, and I would encourage you to look at Section 6 of the most recent lesson plans to find more information about each one of these. I'm only going to talk about a few during this session just in the interest of time. First, we're going to use the Import Land Units. This allows a user to import land units from any feature source layer to generate PLUs. The CLU is a common land unit layer to use, and you can see that represented here on the screen. But depending on your use and your work area, you might consider using others. I'm going to talk through utilizing the parcel layer as well. If I go to my map contents and I turn on my parcel layer, it's difficult to see visually because of the symbology, but I can select on an area, in this case, the west side of tract 1170, and I can see that this one parcel layer or parcel object represents all of the west side of my tract. I know from my planning that this area is managed similarly and is owned by the same client. So I'm going to use the parcel layer to input or import the west side of this farm. If I look at the east side, though, I can see, again, there's land units represented by the CLU. And if I use the parcel layer, I can see those areas are represented, but they're somewhat arbitrary. In this case, I would prefer to use the CLUs themselves to create my PLUs. So I'm going to go back to my import tool. And in this case, I'm going to select the CLU. But I don't want to bring in the entire tract, so I'm not going to search for the entire tract. The reason for this is because I've already grabbed a portion of this and added it to my PLU layer. So I'm simply going to reference the source layer here, but then drag a box to grab all of those fields that correspond to the east portion of my tract. You can see I've got those grabbed here. So now we've added in the east side and we need to attribute. I'm going to go ahead and hit save to commit these, and then I'm going to work to update the status of these PLUs. So one thing I'll note is that from my planning, I identified that this middle area, this more greenish area of the tract, is managed in a way that's similar to each other, but different than my fields on either side. So I'm going to do some manual merging here. So if I grab all these fields, I'm going to use the merge tool to merge them into one. I'm going to select the attributes from Land Unit 6 and create one field area. I have not updated my attributes yet, so I'm going to do that now. All right, we also have some other areas here. This field down here in the corner has some areas that are digitized out, but based on the management of the land, don't need to be differentiated. So I'm going to take the same approach here. I'm going to grab these areas and merge. I will note you can attribute all of these in bulk by selecting the tract overall. I just tend to go through these each one just to make sure I'm tagging them correctly. All right, so now we have one more field. And I can see on my screen and in my editor or my land units toolbar area that this is a draft land unit. Obviously, we can't plan on any draft land units. They have to be in plan status. And the reason why it's draft is due to this overlap area here. So how do I fix the overlap? Do I zoom in to try to make sure I can trace the boundary of this field so that I don't have any overlapping areas? Absolutely not. I can utilize one of our other PLU editor toolbars.
Everyone, thank you for your patience. It looks like we've lost.
Editor. So if I select my land unit and I select vertex editor, you can see the vertices appear on screen. But all I have to do is double click, and double clicking will snap the edge of my field, my selected field, to the neighboring field with the overlap. Thus, I've now removed the overlap. I'm going to go ahead and select yes. While I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and update the attributes. And I'll click save. Now you can see my land unit has gone into plan status. So now let's close and add these land units into our practice schedule. In order to do that, I'm going to come down to the practice schedule and I'm going to select Add Remove Land Units. I'm going to search for the land units in my case PLUs layer and identify my tract. Grab them all because I want to bring them all into my plan and select Add to Schedule. Let's close. So now let's add our land units into our practice schedule. And now our land units are added. So we'll go ahead and close. Next step is to create some practices. So we're going to switch gears and talk through the practice editor. I'm going to go ahead and select Create Edit Practices. And we'll see as this opens that we have a similar set of tools here at the top of our screen. Again, I'm only going to talk about some of these as we go through this process due to the sake of time. The first one I'm going to talk through is creating full extent. I'm going to create a full extent brush management practice. And based on planning discussed with the client, we're going to schedule some brush management on land unit 6. So I'm going to select brush management, and using the full extent practice tool allows me to easily schedule these, and the system will borrow the shape of my field to create a polygon practice with a matching shape. We're going to schedule this in April, and we're scheduling 3 years of brush management. So my start year will be 25 and my end year will be 27. So now we have our 314 brush management practices scheduled. This area of California is in a priority initiative area. In fact, it's in a few. It's in the sagebrush biome and the sage grouse project initiatives. So because the 314 practice that we're scheduling is going to benefit those initiatives, we want to make sure to identify that within our practice schedule. So to do that, we're going to select the practice and go to the priorities tab. You can see here, I can select priorities. I'm going to add the sagebrush and the sage grouse. And we'll do that for each year. This ensures that we're capturing those benefits in these initiative areas. We can see they're here. If I added one by mistake, or in this case, it looks like I missed one, go back and add it back in. But if I added one by mistake, I could go in and delete. But in this case, I've got these tagged appropriately, so I'll go ahead and I'll hit save. And just a note on the priority tab and the ability to associate the practices to an initiative. There are geospatial layers to help identify where these areas are. So you can manage your geospatial layers under your layer preferences and then enable them under map contents. So in this example, I've got my layers down here at the bottom of my feature layer service. So you can see here the sage grouse project boundary, and you can see that it rightfully covers this area, and likewise the sagebrush as well. If these layers didn't cover my planning area, I wouldn't have seen them in my identified priority pull-down menu. If you do have any other questions regarding the priority initiatives, or excuse me, project initiative areas for priority, I would encourage you to reach out to the area-wide planning branch, contact Martin Lowenfish. All right, let's go ahead and schedule a couple other practices within our schedule to demonstrate some additional functionality. So I'm going to go to some additional full extent practices. In this case, I'm going to go to fields 7 and 8. And I'm going to schedule prescribed grazing, which is practice code 528. I'm going to identify the practice. And again, I'm going to schedule it for 3 years, starting in 25, ending in 27. We can see those listed here. Let's go ahead and save. We've done some work in here. Let's go ahead and save these practices. And as we save, we can see that as we schedule any practices, those areas are represented on the map with a red boundary. And again, because we've used the full extent practices functionality, those shapes mimic the shapes of our fields. All right, so I'm going to talk through another tool that's really useful in the practice edit tools. And that is the convert and create tool. So that lives up here, and I'll show you the functionality here in a minute. But what it allows you to do essentially is to identify a polygon and create a line feature that wraps around it or circles the perimeter, or the opposite. If you had a line practice in here that had a designated open close area that defined an area, you could take that line practice and create a polygon shape from it. So let's take a look at how that works in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and in this case, I'm going to create a fence that goes around my prescribed grazing fields. So that's not a full extent practice. So the way to schedule that is to go in and right click on the field and select create practice. I'm going to select practice code 382, which is our practice code for fence. And then you can see here that as I've done that, the convert and create button has become hot or active. And it doesn't do that until I satisfy the criteria to be able to use it. Let's go ahead and select Convert Create. So you can see here, I've got a separate window that opens, and it's again asking me to select a source layer. So I'm going to create this fence, but what layer do I want to select from in order to do that? So in this case, I'm going to use my case peel use layer, and I'm going to select the field on screen. And I'll select OK. And we can see here that a line practice has been created that reflects the extent of the perimeter of my field. And we're going to build this fence in the hottest, driest part of the year in August of 2025. Similarly, I could do the same down here for this field. Same process. From the case peel use, selecting that specific field. And we see that here. Again, attribute that for August, and then I'll hit save. So now we have our practices scheduled. And we have our prescribed grazing, we have our brush management, and we have the fence around 2 of our pastured areas. Now let's approve the practice schedule. Approving the practice schedule converts all these practices that are currently in alternative status over into planned status. This just recognizes the decision made or the agreed to nature of this plan. In order to approve the practice schedule in Conservation Desktop, you're going to come to the schedule and practice schedule approval. Under the practice schedule approval screen, you select the date the plan is approved, the name of the planner, any other information you want to edit here, work performed by, viewable and farmers, etc., and then hit save. The process for doing this is pretty straightforward, but once we do this, the practices will go to a planned status. And once they do that, the practices cannot be deleted, nor can the land units that they're on be deleted, okay? At this point, once the practices are planned, the only thing you can do is, of course, certify them, apply them, or cancel. Another note I'll make about practice schedule approval is I've come in here to do that during this demonstration in order to get the practices to this planned status. If this were a practice schedule I was developing to support a Farm Bill program application, the practice schedule approval is actually set automatically in the system, and it's set based on the obligation of the application to a contract. So you wouldn't necessarily need to do this if this was supporting a Farm Bill contract. You just let that obligation go ahead and trigger that approval. But now you can see that we've got planned practices in our Edit Practices window. And this gives me an opportunity to showcase another nice feature within the Practice Editor, the ability to bulk certify practices. So if you've got a lot of practices on a lot of fields, it can be cumbersome to come in here to find them all to certify if you're certifying in Conservation Desktop. But the filter tool can help you. So I've got my practice editor tools open, and now I'm going to engage my filter tool. So if I open up my filter tool, I'm going to filter my criteria to just look at those practices that are planned in 2025. So I'm fast forwarding. We've completed all the scheduled work in 2025, and now I want to go in and certify. So again, I'm deselecting everything but those that are in the 2025 planned year. So if I hit apply, I can then expand all, and you can see that I've got a truncated list of just those practices that were planned in 2025. Now, if you remember, we had brush management out 3 years, 25, 26, 27, and same for prescribed grazing. But I don't see the 26 or the 27 practice instances here because I filtered to just 2025. This makes it very easy to come in here and select all and certify. I'm going to select the date, and I'm going to update to applied status. In doing this, the system gives me a message to confirm if I certify in this bulk way, what the system is going to do is it's going to take the planned amount of each practice and use that for the applied amount. So again, depending on your use case, you might need to go in here and edit. But if you're applying the same amount that's planned, you can come in here and bulk certify. So if I hit yes, you can see that the practice statuses convert to applied. Save and close. All right, now that the applied information or certified practices information has saved, I'm going to go ahead and clear filters to get back all of my information and click OK. All right, back to the Land Unit Editor toolbar. This is under Create, Edit, PLUs. And I want to show one more tool, which might be my favorite tool of all, the Replace tool. So the Replace tool is out here on the rightmost side of the Editor toolbar, and it allows me to replace the geometry of a land unit with an updated geometry or shape. The Replace tool is powerful because it holds on to the attributes and all the practice and associated information that pertains to that land unit, lets me drop out the shape, select an updated shape, and then reapply all the attributes and practice information to the updated shape. So in this case, as we know, we have created practice lines and polygons. We have practices scheduled on our farm. So we can't, and we've already planned those, so we can't delete the land units. We can replace them or otherwise edit using other editor tools. But again, I like the Replace tool, so that's the one we're gonna showcase. It's pretty powerful. So I'm going to turn off the practice lines and polygons just so we can see our land unit layers a little bit more. So in this hypothetical scenario, we have our merged land unit 8, but it turns out this little chunk of ground over here is something Sharon actually wanted to leave out of the field to potentially allow her son to build a house on. So we need to replace it with an updated shape. So I'm going to come to the Replace tool, and I'm going to select to import from a land unit layer. So this is very similar to our import that we did when we initially created the land units. I'm going to select from my CLU, which drops out that old shape of the land unit and allows me to select this from the CLU layer. I want to talk a little bit about autocomplete. Autocomplete is an option that you have here, which is really helpful as well. Autocomplete serves to, when it's selected, it serves to snap to the edges of all the neighboring fields, thus avoiding you creating accidental overlaps. This is very similar to how we corrected the overlap up here at the top, but this autocomplete allows you to do that right in the context of the replace. If I unselected the autocomplete, the system would bring in the CLU layer as is, overlaps and all. You might ask, why would I ever want to bring in a CLU layer and make overlaps? Well, the benefit with doing this is that if I had to replace all of these land units around here, if I was constantly snapping to the edges, I would be constantly shaving off bits and pieces of every CLU, and I would never get a chance to bring them all in their true form. So deselecting the autocomplete allows you to bring in the CLU in its initial extent and then work around to resolve overlaps as needed. In this case, I'm working on updating just this one land unit and replacing just this one land unit. So I'm going to go ahead and autocomplete to ensure I have no overlaps. And now we can see the updated shape. And if I select the land unit, we can see the land use, the attributes, and we also have our associated practices still intact. So just a note on this, the Replace tool is really handy. However, it does not update your actual practice shapes. So if I deselect my practice lines, you can see my practice shape is still the original intent or extent, excuse me, of this merged field. So we would need to update that geometry if we were working on plan maps, etc. But again, that's the power of the Replace tool, being able to update the geometry of fields that have associated practice data with them. All right, so just a little bit more as I close out. I want to talk a little bit about some of what you're seeing around. My active PLU layer has been active as I've been working in my work area. Again, it's helped me identify drafts. draft land units and overlaps. But I wanted to use it to point out some additional information as well. So again, if you're in a work area and say I needed to work up here and I see there's an active PLU that's in locked status. I know it's locked, so I know I can't edit it, but I might need to do some work and I might need to know where this land unit is. I can select the layer in my map contents and use my identify tool to find out more information. I can see the service center. I can see the case name. So in this example, this is a WRP easement. And I can see other attributes about the land. But what I want to point out here is within these attributes, there's a series of locks. Go ahead and select them all. Whoop, all the way down. There's contract lock, there's easement locked, there's cart locked, there's CSP locked, and then there's resource locks down at the bottom. And these can help tell you what is causing the land unit to be locked. In this case, this is a WRP, right? We know that from the case file name and the program, but we also know that because this shows an easement locked status of true. So again, in this situation, the easement is what's locking this land unit. If it were if the land unit were locked and it was part of a farm bill contract, it would show contract lock of true. So again, if this was locked due to a Protrax farm bill contract. If cart locked showed a true value, that would be because the land unit is in a cart assessment that's in either assessed or selected status. If it had a CSP lock of true, that would be because the land unit was in a 2014 farm bill contract. Shouldn't have too many of those. And then last but certainly not least, if the land unit is in a CD application and agreement, the resource locks down here at the bottom would list CDAA agreement. In this example, that's not the case, and so there leaves a blank value. I hope this has shed some light on how to utilize the land unit editor and practice editor tools, as well as some associated information to help manage the data that you have and the information in some real world scenarios.
All right, again, hopefully that was helpful, and we'll go ahead and keep moving on, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Heather Hinson to speak on field inventory.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good day, everyone. My name is Heather Hinson. I am a Conservation Field Tool Specialist with the Conservation Planning Branch, and today I want to talk to you about field inventory. So what is field inventory? So previously, when we had toolkits, field inventory was called a resource inventory. And what that is used for, it's used to document any concerns, problems, or existing practices that can affect the use, management, sustainability of SWAPA resources on the land. The permissions for field inventory are tied directly to your state that is selected as your service center and county in your permissions. It is not tied directly to a client, a case file, a practice schedule, or an agreement. So therefore, the user does not have to have a client loaded into the table of contents in CD in order to be able to work with field inventory. So where is field inventory located inside of CD? Next slide. So we're going to click on our map tools, and we're going to look at our layer preferences. In our layer preferences, under Other, we're going to see our field inventory lines, points, and polygons. The user needs to make sure those boxes are checked so that our field inventory tool editor will become active. And our field inventory editor tool is on our map tools, and it looks like a little clipboard. Next slide. So creating our field inventory. To create our field inventory, we're going to open up that field inventory editor, and you're going to see the Add New. The user is going to select the Add New button, and you're going to be able to select the category, the name, and the practice code that you're wanting to create an attribute for. So the different categories we have are existing practice, infrastructure, landscape, monitoring, and special environmental concerns. If we want to go to the next slide. So some of our different categories that we have for existing practices, those are going to be your practices that you can plan for inside of CD. For infrastructure, it's going to be things like an airport, an airstrip, energy, farm storage, fuel storage, a livestock shelter. And then for landscape, you can have a bank erosion, a borrow pit, compaction, a ditch, anything like that on the landscape. Next slide. So for monitoring, if you want to record any monitoring that's going on, such as crop inventory, forest inventory, any erosion, there is easement monitoring features on there. However, this is not your typical easement monitoring, so please do not use that for that specific purpose. And then we have special environmental concerns, such as the Clean Air Act, endangered and threatened animal species, plant species, any historic building or natural areas. Now, if you'll notice under the monitoring, and it goes with all of them, there's an other inventory, there's a line, a point, and a polygon. So if you decide there's a feature out there that goes under one of these specific categories that's not already listed, the user does have the option to enter that in, and as well as the note or description for that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so once we select Add New and we select our category and the name or the practice code, if you're doing the existing practices, you're always going to want to mark the functionality. Is it functional or not? You will not be able to save this particular attribute if you do not mark the functionality on it. So you'll notice with our toolbar under our draw, if you select a polygon practice, you have the option to create a polygon or a point for that particular practice. Same thing with the line practice. You can create a line or a specific point. Now, if you are creating specifically a point practice, currently you will not be able to create a line or a polygon for that. You will only be able to create a point. Next slide. All right, so not only can we draw those field inventories, we can also import them from our layers, such as the legacy, historical, case, active, or our CLU. So the user would simply select import from our field inventory toolbar and then select the particular layer that they want to import from. And again, if you're doing an existing practice, you always want to make sure to check that functionality button. Next slide. So labeling those field inventory attributes. The one thing to note on labeling is you do have to have a client and a case file loaded into the table of contents in order to label those field inventory features. So to label those, you're going to select the label tool, and you're going to select the specific layer that you want to label. You can only do one layer at a time, whether it's the polygons, the points, or the lines. You can't do all three at once. You'll select the attributes that you like, and you'll select the fields. And notice how the description and the notes are available to include on those label sections, so that if you do have a code that was not in the drop down for those categories, you do have the option to include that in your label. Next slide. So here you can see in CD what those labels will look like when you create them for those field inventory. And this is specifically for the polygons. Next slide. So now you want to create a map of your field inventory layers. And again, the client does have to be loaded into the table of contents, whether it's a case file and a practice schedule. So you're going to want to go to Conservation Products, and you're always going to want to select that general ad hoc map to create that field inventory map. Next slide. So once you create the ad hoc, or once you select the ad hoc and then select next, you're going to select the attributes that you want to show up on your map, such as the title, the client, the land unit. And then once you create that and the status is complete, you'll simply go to Actions and select Preview. Next slide. So here we've created our field inventory map. And if you'll notice, one of those polygons was outside of our client land unit. So when you create a map and you have the client loaded into the table of contents, any field inventory features that you create outside of that client will not show up on that map. And this, again, is for PI reasons. Next slide. And so with the symbology, this is a direct shot from CD, where the other one, the previous one that we just looked at, was the map. The symbology is a little bit different on the map. There's a defect on that right now that they're working on. But you can see that there is symbology for those field inventory features. Next slide. So what's to come with field inventory? So previously when I said those point practices, you can only create them as a point, unlike the line or the polygons. We are working to be able to create a line or polygon for those specific point practices. And one of the big pushes that they are starting to work on for field inventory is getting those existing practices linked into CART as an existing practice. So once that happens, it will automatically display when you're working through your CART assessment under those existing practice, whether it's historical or observed. Next slide. So now that's all I have for field inventory today. I'm going to turn it over to Christy McKinley to talk to you about the land unit report.
All right, thank you, Heather. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to show you today the land unit report tool. This tool is one of the only tools that allows you to use multiple monitors, so you can select land units from the map and then view the information tied to the land unit and the practices in another monitor while keeping the map open. Since you're selecting PLUs, you're going to see all the practices that are selected from the map, and so you can kind of see that screenshot there. And then over on the right, to get to the land unit report tool, it's under your map tools, and I've got the specific icon for the land unit report tool highlighted in the red outline. So let's go ahead and just jump in, and then we'll walk through how to use the tool. So one thing that's nice about this tool is it's one of the only tools that does allow you to find any practice that has been planned, applied, certified, canceled on the specific land units for any case file or practice schedule. I'm not seeing the video yet. Molly, here we go. All right, give it just a second. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of walk it through here. So I'm using the select tool, and so what I'm doing is just selecting the PLUs directly off of the map. So you can see I've got the practice schedule open. I've selected the land unit report, and now I'm going to let it open. And so if you notice, it opens up in a separate window, so that window can be moved over to another monitor if you want. One of the things on the left-hand side I'm showing there is that you have the ability to turn off and on land units, so you can focus on specific ones. You can also change your view. So I had land units selected. I can also switch to the case PLUs or the practice schedule PLUs, so it'll show you the different land units that you currently have available that's turned on in your map. So practice information, there is a lot of practice information in here. So this will show you all the practice information from all the practice schedules and case files that are linked to the specific land units that you have selected. We also have information in here that tied, we'll see here, so we can see some ProTrack's equip contracts. So here's one of the contract that's tied to some of these land units. We're working to get the CDAA RCPP contract data into this tool. Right now, it's only ProTracks. So there's 3 reports that you can run on this land unit report tool. The land unit report's the first one that I'm pulling in, and so that's going to be based on any of the land units that you have selected. And so it's looking at your selection method, and then here in just a second I'll pull over the land unit report. And so that's how you can kind of see the information tied to the specific land units. So you can see just some of the details tied to these land units I have selected off the map. The next report I'm going to run is going to be the land use summary report. This report was originally developed for us to be able to look at CSP. So we'll let it run here in just a second. And then you can kind of see how it does. It's going to be doing a little summary for us of land use by practice. So there's no roles tied to this land unit report tool as long as you can get into your maps, open up a schedule, open up the case PLUs. You can start running this tool on your own. So you can see that was the land unit or land use report tool. And the next thing we'll show just real quick is there's a practice report tool. So I'm just downloading these really quick and then just opening them up. You can just view them. You don't have to necessarily download them. But once we pull that one over, so this is going to look just like your table. So you're viewing the table. If you want to do some analysis, some of the things folks do is pull this in, turn on the filters. I want to look at a specific practice to make sure I'm not paying for the same practice on the same land unit for more than one time. And so that gives you historical information tied to that specific land unit or practice, whatever it is that you want to be able to look at. And that's all I have on the land unit report tool. It's a really nice feature. If you haven't used it, please try it out sometime. And I think that should be all. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Crystal Runge, and she's going to go in to talk about geospatial layers and other updates. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Christy. Yeah, hello, I am Crystal Runge. I'm the National Geospatial Specialist on the Conservation Planning Branch. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about the identified priority practices, which were hit on already a little bit by Jennifer. And then the map display default changes that were made, some geospatial services, and then an overview of a couple of things that we are working on. Go ahead, next slide. So first off is the identified priority practices. Like I said, Jennifer kind of hit on this already. CD and CART have the function that allows the users to link individual conservation practices with identified priorities that they benefit. And then this offers an efficiency to attribute all linked practices to multiple priorities that they benefit, regardless of the funding source. And so in our layer preferences, you'll find that the working lands for wildlife layers are all under the wildlife category, and then the initiative layers can all be found under the land site category. And each of these layers has a practice associated with them. So when the practice is selected and located in the area of an identified priority layer, that identified priority will show up on the drop down. And as Jennifer kind of demonstrated already under the priorities tab. So first of all, to rehash under the edit practices, you would be able to identify your priorities for existing features in CD. And then you'd have to go in CART under your add practices. We'll have to check that as a priority in CART. If the priority box is checked in CART but not entered in CD, a message will prompt you to select and identify the priority upon closing the editing module. Okay. These two links in the slide kind of overlapped, but they're also in the resources in the back. There's a area-wide planning has created a boundary web map that has all the identified practices or priority project boundaries. So you can open that up and be able to see where each of those land. There's also a link to the fact sheet on being able to identify priority tracking in CD and CART. All right, next slide. Okay, I've had a few questions on availability versus visibility and why you have to check them both on or in different locations. So under layer preferences, when you look under category, you'll have your layers will show up there to be able to check as available. And then if you go to by draw order, then you have the ability to check on the feature as visible and the layers as visible. Now, the thing to remember here is that you can have on as many layers as you want under availability as being on or available. You want to, I'm going to warn you that you're going to want to be careful how many features you have visible, because it will draw everyone that you have checked visible, even if you have it not checked on your table of contents. So it's doing that in the background, which will slow down your map. So a little bit of a warning message or a way of keeping in mind: availability on and visibility only as required. Okay, go ahead, next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the other thing that enhancement that we worked on that's out there is turning off the map display as the default. In the past, the map service would automatically turn on as the users logged into CD. And when that happened, even though the person didn't have the map set in their user's preference, the map would still turn on in the background, and it would cause network slowness. So we implemented this change to hopefully reduce the load and the application runtime. So turning off the map display as a default when opening Conservation Desktop was our goal. And so the map display does not turn on unless you actually go in and interact with the map, which need the map to interact, which will open up as a case file is opened up in the table of contents, or an HELWC request will also initiate that map. But the landing page that you will be defaulted to under your preferences on the home screen default will be your search case files and agreements, and your map will appear once you've done that. If you're a person that needs a map and doesn't necessarily always go into case files and you just do maps for locations, you can change that default preference to map if that's what you want. Go ahead, next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about geospatial services today, and what a geospatial service is it's referring to all the layers in CD and CART are published somewhere, whether it be GeoPortal. Most of the time it's GeoPortal, or else we could get some outside services. And what a geospatial service is it's basically a URL that links to the location of the data that it's being used. And so in this, and these are used in assessments and rankings and mostly soils uses a lot of them too. So here I went and looked at how many geospatial services we actually are using when it comes to just CART. CD has always had a lot of geospatial because of the mapping portion, but CART's kind of been a little bit more behind on that. So in 2021, there was 700 geospatial services that were used in ranking questions. So that means there was 700 data sources or data that was linked in them questions. In February of 2024, there was 997 geospatial services used with over almost 3,000 questions, geospatial questions. Now here back in February, we went up a little bit in the geospatial services that were being used. There was 1,039, but we went up in a lot of geospatial questions. For a GIS person like me, that gets me excited because it shows me that you guys are all using the geospatial services in CART. So to break that down, of the 1,039, a majority of those were state-specific services. So the states published their own data to be used in the geospatial ranking questions. And some of them were national services, but a great majority were just state specific. So in 2024, the breakdown of how the geospatial services were used in ranking questions, equability had 1,030, which does not surprise me because a lot of people use that to say, okay, where are we located? Is it in or out? And that was the first things that a lot of people used. In February this year, when we got this report, the geospatial ranking questions applicability was the smallest, which now we have category, resource, and programs questions being used using geospatial information. And so some of those are like for for programs, for instance, ag, census, farm acres is a common one that's used. And for resources, census urban areas, so the census data gets used a lot. And then for applicability and category, like a big one that's used is the initiative NWQI implementation boundary is used for that. So kudos to everybody that is starting to really put geospatial questions into, or using geospatial questions to help with their rankings and assessments. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so this document, I'm actually updating some of the links because we got some new data and we've got some links that are outdated. And now with AWS migration happening, some of the links will change. But this document can be found on the CART SharePoint, geospatial SharePoint site. And it shows you all of the links of the different data that National has and is available for use, whether it's be FPAC Geo that's published them, or if it's us at the national level on the planning branch that has done it. So the links are in here, and also a little description of what those data sources are. Also in this document is how those geospatial questions can be used, and the different definitions, whether it be a buffer question or an intersect question with that geospatial. So next. Okay, so overview of the new features. Some of the new features I'm working on right now is basically using the map templates to export data in Arc Pro and the desktop for customizing maps. We'll go into that and show you some of that. And then updating the CART geospatial SharePoint. And I know I just talked about that a little bit. The old one still works. We're just kind of updating and moving that a little bit. So next slide. So first off, using map templates, what we're trying to do here is when the conservation planners were in need of using or need to use the practice schedule information and for their maps and templates. And a lot of states had their own templates that they were needing the data in, or the products out, the maps that were coming out, the symbology, they wanted to change symbology because the symbology was over, not being able to have the flexibility to change the symbology and the formatting on the PDF that was coming out. So we come up with a process that we're going to be able to allow for this to be going into Arc Pro and be able to use that. The thing to keep in mind here is that with this use of the templates and exporting the data out, it's basically exporting out, so it won't come back to CD. So you're only doing it, you can be using this to make any kind of changes to the map, to like symbology changes or that the formatting changes, that kind of thing, because to print the map, because we can't do any kind of practice schedules or practices or land unit changes on these maps. So so the goal was to have a downloadable package that people can use, the users can use, and be able to have the ability to, in that package, have the templates, state-specific templates, and a national template, depending on what they'd like. So next slide. So this is the first part that's done, and it's going in Rutabaga. This is actually for anybody that has any users out there that has the data configuration permissions in CD. You're used to using it for your geospatial services. Now there's a geospatial template category under it, and it will allow for the state specialist to be able to put in a state specific template into CD that would be able to be chosen in when you download your package. Okay, so and it also will be allowing for any kind of styles files or that your state might have. So if your state has state specific symbology, that can be added in here too as part, so it can be used for the download package. So this part here is just specific to the data config roles. So next slide. So this is where we tie it in, right? So we're going to export, and the purpose of this is that we're going to be able to export the practice data into a file format with for ArcPro, and still have the ability in conservation products to do the same thing, but we don't have to go through conservation products all the way through the conservation product steps to do it. So the planner will be able to export all the practice scheduled data in one of the following ways: with a map template, with the practice schedule, geospatial data, with a style form or style file, or only if you only want to have the practice schedule geospatial data. So then, and you can also you'll be able to select the template. So some of the screenshots on the bottom here are just showing you, like, if you wanted to do a template, you can choose a national or state, and they're kind of fuzzy. I'm sorry about that. And then the style source, whether it be a template or a file for your styles, for your symbology file. And then if you wanted to do export of your geospatial data, you could choose, the other one is just showing you that you can choose your state specific. So it does give you the option. If we'll have a national one, but a state one could be there too. And if your state, you could choose your state one. So as you can see, it will be added under create edit practice, and between and create edit agreements, there will be a export geospatial data at the practice schedule tab on their table of contents. And this will, when you export, it'll export out the PLUs, practices, and labels, and you don't have to individually go on into each practice. Like, say, right now you have to export the practice lines, and you have to export practice polygons. It'll be one big package geodatabase that it'll have together. So when you get it all done, it'll be a zip file that has your state. If you choose state template, it'll have your ArcPro project template and that geodatabase. And when you open it up, it should reference those that geodatabase. So it won't be a broken link for you. Now, as far as the templates go, those are based off of the state. So we aren't going to be managing what layers are in it. That's state specific to that state and that state GIS specialist. So that's our link. We're working on that right now. We had a few hiccups, so that's not quite ready to go, but that will be the connecting factor with what you had seen earlier. So next slide. So here's the slide, what I was talking about with the revision. This is what I'm working on now, is the revision to the CART geospatial page. It's still a viable page. I just have it under construction. Some of the links to the help documents that are in it and stuff are broke and don't work, but there are some stuff that still works. So we're just updating it. And in the process of doing that, we had to change the SharePoint version that we were using. And so that's what you're seeing on the other on the right. And in the process of doing this, we'll also have tabs in there with the links to the different national layers too, just like that document that I showed you earlier that had the different URLs of geospatial services in it. This will have them under the drop down or the drop down of the different layers. So that is coming. So stay tuned for that. Next slide. With that, I thank you for listening to this little geospatial update, and I'm going to turn it over to Zoe for any questions.
Thank you, Crystal. So we are going to move on to our question and answer segment. There are quite a few questions here, which is great. Thank you for being so engaging in this forum. So our first question is for Jennifer Chen, and that is, do you have any tips for when the Edit Vertex tool doesn't fix a land unit in draft status? Jennifer?
Appreciate the question. I know that's a frustration. So just a couple items, and of course, it kind of depends on the specific scenario, but I will say typically more often than not, those overlaps do occur because of a conflict or an overlap, or excuse me, the draft situation occurs because of an overlap with the active PLUs, much like I showed in my demonstration. And again, if you use the vertex editor, and click within the field, it should snap to those boundaries, but depending on the particular scenario, there are some other tools that might help alleviate the draft status or remove those overlaps. The replace tool can also be useful in those situations, and I did walk through the replace tool, so you can kind of reference that. And then there's also the reshape tool, which I did not talk about today, but it's another one that can help address overlaps when you've got draft land units. So I'd encourage you to look at those tools in more detail as you try to work through some of those issues. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So our next question is back to Crystal. And this question says, there was an option at one point to upload and import GPS files to CD. Do you foresee that function coming back? Crystal?
Yeah, you can import zip shape files or GPX file formats using the plus sign under the map contents. And then that will become visible in an additional layer in your map. And then you can do your new feature by importing it into your PLUs through that way.
Great, thank you, Crystal. So our next question then is for Christy, and this one says, is there a way to remove cancel practices in CD that weren't completed through a program contract? An example would be where the practice was canceled or deleted in ProTracks and then doesn't get canceled / deleted in CD. We typically have to go back after the fact and cancel each practice not applied. Christy?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that we do get quite a bit. So, so when you go through a contract modification, if you don't delete the practice from the agreement item, I know you can go in and enter zero applied amounts, and there's other things that ProTracks may let you do. But as long as that practice is linked to an agreement item, it'll stay in a plan status and it cannot be canceled because it's tied to that agreement item. So, I mean, we're aware of that issue, and I think some of the things that are between ProTracks and desktop we are working on to make better. One of the things we are working on is to be able to create a modification for canceling practices where some of the practices are not going to get completed and they can be canceled during a mod in ProTracks. And then that way you don't have to worry about coming back in desktop, canceling the practices, because it's all going to be done through one workflow. So hopefully more things to come on that, but that is kind of where we're at on it. Apologize that, sometimes I know those practices get stuck and they're sitting there in a planned status, and the only option you have is removing them as you're going through a contract mod, and then you still have to go into CD and cancel those manually, but that is the current workflow. So that's all I got. Thank you, Zoe.
No problem. Thanks, Christy. And our last question for the day is back to Crystal. And this one says, when did you say this export geospatial data tool would come out? Crystal, do you have an update on that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I didn't really specify, I guess. I was hoping it was going to come out with this next build with Rutabaga, but they ran into a few snags. So my next best bet would be the next build, which is about a month or so out, probably.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. There's a few more questions we have, but we're going to dive deeper into them, and the answers will be available through both the NRCS SharePoint site and also the NCPP homepage. So you'll find the recording there and other details from this forum. So we'll turn it back to Christy to close us out.
All right. Well, thank you, Zoe. Thanks, everyone, for attending today's user forum, and thank you to all the presenters for sharing Planning Data 101. I'll be emailing a feedback form out to get your valuable feedback. We do review those as well as any suggestions for CD cart improvements. We also, as Zoe mentioned, we also share slides, the videos, the Q&A. For NRCS, we post those on the We Are NRCS SharePoint site. And as Zoe said, for partners, they share those out with all the partnership as well. Hope you can join us for our next user forum. It's going to be on May 21st, and that's where we're going to cover DMS, our conservation, desktop application and agreement module. We have our select application tool, and then we have reports around the CD applications and agreements as well as RCPP. So a lot more information to come. So hope you can join us. Until then, have a great day and see you next time.